Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to do a different type of series, the channel's first top 10 hardest games list. As somebody that's played through a lot of games, I mean a lot of games, I wanted to make a video like this for a really long time. But the concept of putting out a definitive top 10 hardest games list when there's so many more games for me to try just always had me in paralysis about this topic. On one hand, I don't want to wait until I'm 40 or 50 years old until I make a video like this. On the other hand, coming out with a definitive list now seems so irresponsible, like I'm spreading misinformation, and I can't do that with so many stones left unturned. So while I don't want to wait forever, I also don't want to make a strong and wrong list right now that's based on insufficient information. What would definitely make a lot more sense and also help the quest to truly find the top 10 hardest games of all time would be to invite commentary and to have this being a running dialogue. Then using that information, playing those games, and coming out with a new list maybe once every year or two, based on what changes. But don't get me wrong, this top 10 is full to the brim of hard-ass games from several top 10 hardest lists, because watching and reading those is actually how I used to decide what challenge I would tackle next, for several years. The major difference that cannot be overlooked from my video on this topic compared to many out there, these will not be nearly as generic or from hearsay. These are all games I've beaten not just once, but anywhere from 2 or 3, and some even 10 to 20 times, since many of the hardest games of all time aren't actually very long, but just so difficult to the point that many write them off as impossible or not worth attempting. I can tell you that after going through all of these games, it's almost like your thumbs go through a hyperbolic time chamber training, where your thumbs mutate and level up several times, performing way differently than before. Your attention to detail becomes more keen than ever, seeing and reacting to things so much sooner, with less mistakes, and your perception of what used to feel absolutely ridiculous changes completely, which I expect to keep happening as I keep playing over the years. So let's get right to it. Here's my very first edition of Top 10 Hardest Games that I've beaten so far. Number 10, Swordmaster. Here we have a medieval action RPG that reminds me of, but actually takes place almost 20 years earlier than, Dark Souls, but on the NES. Swordmaster is a mix of fidgety and tricky platforming along with heavy emphasis with one-on-one combat. As you defeat enemies, your experience meter fills, and when it does, your health slightly increases. There are only 6 levels in the game, but the common theme with a lot of the hardest games out there are that they're pretty short, but face people with challenges that they simply cannot overcome. As you get further in the game, you have a higher and higher number of one-on-one back-to-back encounters, but with more and more difficult enemies. The great thing is, although you can get true game overs in this game that send you all the way back to the beginning, your improved health and experience bar remains, which is huge. You really have to buckle in and get extremely focused in order to take down a title like this. The aspect that anybody you fight can really be dangerous is actually a similarity that I find with Dark Souls as well. With its heavy emphasis on these duels, Swordmaster will truly make you live up to its name, because mastering your controls and sword is the only way to make it through this epic medieval challenge. Not to mention the final boss against the Serpent Lord seems nearly impossible if you approach it defensively, until you are aware enough to recognize openings and go after its weak point like a complete madman just trying to out-damage until victory. Number 9, Lion King. For those of you that didn't already know, Lion King is hard as balls. There are 10 levels in this game, and the sad thing is, most players wouldn't even know it, since they could never see past the first few, let alone actually finishing this incredibly difficult test. Those that are uninformed might be thinking, Lion King, how hard could that possibly be? Well, it's no accident that the game turned out this way, along with many other games of the era where developers actually made their games extremely difficult on purpose. This is when companies and publishers were leery of players being able to finish their game in a rental period back when video game rentals were a huge deal. They figured if the player can beat the game in a 3-day period, they probably won't buy it. So let's make sure these games are so hard that they'll be tempted to just buy the game instead of renting it for a second or third time, which says a lot about the challenge, considering that so many of these games are only around 20 to 40 minutes from start to finish. Limited continues, death pits, ruthless obstacles, notoriously confusing and merciless level design. Even with a ton of practice, for many, this game is still complete hell to make it through without being sent back to the start screen. For the elite and small percentage of players that actually put in the time to reach Simba's adulthood, many were completely decimated by Be Prepared's overwhelming amount of enemies and lava death pits. Making it beyond this just meant being totally disheartened by a daunting maze full of dozens of rooms with infinitely spawning hyenas. Getting to Scar on the last level did anything but guarantee victory, as his level is hard and he is one of the most puzzling boss fights in history, where his facial expressions are supposed to be indicators on when to pounce and throw him when he's tired. If you were able to think about that just like his life bar, that would make sense, except for the fact that he still sometimes randomly swats at you anyway. Facing off against him 3 times in this gauntlet after the 9 levels before it, 8 of which are completely butt-pounding, it's no wonder why barely anybody can say that they made it through this beast. Number 8, Cuphead. A lot of people may be shocked to see this famously difficult game at this point in the list, and there's a lot to consider when placing a game that is bursting at the seams with overwhelmingly fast-paced and hardcore challenge. Cuphead is a game that was able to put a ton of modern gamers on their heels, if not completely floor and embarrass them for hours, because this level of old-school precision is just not found in many other games today. The levels and bosses are absolutely difficult, cleverly designed in so many ways to push the player in a wide array of 2D action. It's totally normal for a player to grind in a single fight for hours without coming away with a W. The huge advantage when it comes to completing Cuphead though is that many of these stages or fights are only 1 to 2 minutes long, and extremely important to consider, there are no game overs. You have unlimited tries everywhere you go. Now if this game was designed like many other hard games on the list, with a number of deaths eventually sending you back all the way to the beginning, then all of a sudden Cuphead, we would be having a completely different conversation about this animal of a game. Cuphead is hard. There is no such thing as being lazy in getting through its levels. It asks a lot from you and continues to ask more and more as you get further into the game. But as long as you stay observant, get precise, and keep practicing, you will absolutely chip through and then master this game, and it's a total blast to sit down and beat the entire thing in one sitting. Getting top ranks in the whole game was one of the highest challenges I've ever been able to accomplish, but the fact is I was able to try as many times as I wanted and never got sent back for several minutes, if not hours after maximum effort, which isn't something I can say about all of the games on this list. Number 7, Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden is synonymous with the term NES hard. What starts out as a straightforward first level without any gaps turns into complete pitfall and enemy hell all within just a couple of stages. The further you get, the more consistently precise you have to be. This game will punish the crap out of gamers with bad habits like ill-advised jumps or any hesitation to make your moves. You have infinitely responding enemies, so your mindset needs to absolutely be, fuck everything behind me and just keep moving ahead. If you stay in place or go backwards, more enemies will continue to pop up infinitely. It never stops, so you have to be swift, precise, and decisive as hell in order to progress. There are a couple of extremely serious tests in this game. One level that is notorious, 6-2, where you're completely surrounded by pits and enemies, with truly only so many ways to navigate the various hectic situations that come from it. But the thing that pushes this game from hard as hell into straight insanity is the second form of the final boss, where you really need to have a game plan, and it gets down to a science. If you don't, get this, any death on these final bosses sends you back to the first level of the world, 6-1, meaning you have to make it back through all of this again, including the ruthless 6-2, and they do not even fill your life bar when you get back here. Again, one death, back to 6-1. Over and over, making this one of the most maddening challenges out there. Although, once you have this game down, sitting down to play for an intense 20 minutes or so makes it something that you will want to continue to come back to face. Number 6, Ghosts and Goblins. You may be wondering, how the hell did Ghosts and Goblins not even crack the top 5? Well, that's because we are talking about some extremely serious shit here at this point. Ghosts and Goblins is ruthlessly difficult, and I mean that. It's ruthless. The way the game handles would make most people believe that it's broken or unplayable, with your stiff control that does not allow you to control your momentum in the air. This means that every decision you make needs to be calculated, and you cannot afford to fuck up basically at all, literally since only 2 hits result in your death. The way to win in a game like this is just counterintuitive, since many gamers may be used to thinking they need to avoid their enemies, but that's not how this game really works. You cannot simply avoid your enemies. It's a decisive blend of knowing when to continue running, or when you need to drop anchor, pound your attack button, and fight for your life. By its first level, the game is already much harder than a lot of games' final level, to be honest, and that's not a joke. Then by its second level, you are onto some extremely serious challenge with a long-winded section, a ton of enemies to defeat that soak up so many hits, and a double boss battle that, again, if you only get hit twice during all of this, you're back to the last checkpoint. By levels 5 and 6, it feels like you have everything against you. Many attempts seem to reach a point that utterly feel like you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, as sometimes determined by RNG, and you just have to come back each attempt with the attitude that you'll continue to play clean and smart in hopes that the game won't end up boning you for it. Enemies get absolutely insane. The boss gauntlet of level 6 and having to fight them with their specific weapons is just crazy. Not a better word for it. And always walking on a tightrope between life and death is just something you will need to not only get used to, but thrive with in this completely ass-ramming classic. The saving grace is that you truly do have unlimited continues, which means it's only over when you say it's over. But for millions of players, that time comes up sooner rather than later, as the game quickly and assertively manhandles you into submission over and over and over again. again. By the way, you need to make it through its levels twice in order to truly say you've beaten it, and I can tell you from experience the second playthrough has been consistently more tricky with quicker spawning and moving enemies, with some notably more spazzy AI, like with its numerous red devils in level 3 and beyond. And of course, for some hard games out there, for some reason the last boss is ironically the easiest challenge you have yet, but getting there is an entirely different story. Number 5, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles 1 on NES is an insane side-scroller that so many people talk about in regard to its difficulty, often harping on only its second level, the Dam. But it's so rarely fully realized just how hard this game gets the further you venture into its 6 levels. All things considered, the Dam level is laughable. Yes, laughably easy compared to completing its later stages in the game. The overworlds get big, enemies respawn infinitely, there are a few ridiculously stubborn and precise jumps, the control is floaty and tricky for many, and at some point the enemies become so absurdly powerful that you're better off just doing everything in your power to avoid them. The 5th level of trying to locate the Technodrome is sadistic, because it could be located at the end of any of these few caverns. It's essentially randomly generated, so you do not know where it will be. If it's not there, you need to go all the way back through the cavern, with all of those enemies respawned and ready to fight you again, just to check the next one. And get this, if you were to die and lose any of your turtles, the position of the Technodrome is randomly reset. Yes, meaning it could be at the end of one of the caverns that you just checked. That is absolutely ridiculous. The boss fight of the Technodrome is hard enough, with a whole lot of shit going on, and a death there puts you back at the beginning of this search again, which is horrendous, but most importantly inside the Technodrome, you encounter some of the most asinine enemies, like these pink jetpack guys that completely obliterate your health, and your whole way to get through this is to actively avoid and manipulate them off screen in order to advance. To top all of this off, Shredder is a fight that has some attacks that rip right through your health, plus he has a gun that morphs your turtle back, killing you instantly and setting you back to the top of the level. Not to mention you have limited continues. After just a few game overs, you are back to the title screen, dude. There's a reason why this is one of the most commonly played games of its day, while also being regarded as nothing short of legendary and shocking to meet somebody that has actually made it through this ruthless gauntlet. Number 4, Ninja Gaiden 3. Some may feel like one entry per franchise is the way to do a list like this, and to that I say, no. This is a list about the hardest games we can find. If there are a couple from the same series, that means they deserve to be here. The crazy thing is, many people don't even understand or realize that the notoriously difficult Ninja Gaiden isn't even more difficult than one of its sequels. Ninja Gaiden 3 is next level, man. With, again, a lot of enemies, several choking points, death pits everywhere, unbelievably tight squeezes with very little room for error, and one thing that makes it much harder is how long the levels get. You have a ridiculous amount of time between your checkpoints, especially as you get later into the game. But what's the one thing that could really drive the concept of finishing a game like this into oblivion? You have true game overs that eventually send you to the beginning of the game. The fact is this, even in Japan, Ninja Gaiden 3 was tweaked and made easier with far less damaging hazards, enemies, and unlimited continues. So getting through this complete cactus horde means you need to overcome absolutely insane rooms where mistakes need to be limited. The checkpoints are ruthlessly spread out, especially late in the game, and you have another trio of extremely challenging bosses that, when you die, send you back to the start of a huge fucking level. I mean huge, with several parts that are just unforgivable and hard as crap. If it took you over an hour of blood, sweat, and tears to get this far, then you make the tiniest mistake to lose that last life. I'm sorry, man, but you're back at the start screen. This is where you need to compress all of that anger into focus, where you get into that special zone that makes you discern where any little thing that went wrong, determining how to fix it, and then consistently stepping up to those big moments to execute. Number 3, Silver Surfer. Here we have a title that is truly unforgiving in every sense of the word. Although Silver Surfer as a character is supposed to be of course very strong and arguably immortal, they made him the complete opposite in this relentless, touch anything means death, large sprite shoot 'em up. This is one of those games that some even disregard on their hardest list because they, quote, don't want to count games that feel broken or unplayable. That is just a testament to how this game actually makes you feel when you give it only a few tries. You think that there's absolutely no way that I or anybody can make it through an entire level or section without touching anything, and that's just exactly what you need to do to beat this game. Every single level, every section, you need to make it through without touching anything. You have to carefully grab and stack power-ups in order to get your firepower and multiple lines of trajectory going, and hold on to them for dear life, because one death doesn't just send you back, it strips you of all of your power-ups. Depending on what section you're at this point, this can make things almost impossible, truly being completely underpowered where enemies take several shots and seconds to die, as opposed to if you touch anything or grazing your sprite, you are done. The gameplay really does speak for itself if you're trying to figure it out. Trying to figure out just what it takes to get through these 18 sections and multiple boss fights. The final sections take what was already totally overwhelming and amplifies it to a point that feels as if they never wanted anybody to finish the game. And the final boss himself is a marathon that extends up to or even over a minute straight of pounding your fully charged shots as quickly as your thumb can while consistently having close calls with starting this level all over again, of course with no power-ups. And what pushes this over the edge? Of course, limited continues. Yep, no matter how far you get in this game, 3 game overs and you are back at the beginning, man. Number 2, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. For the second time on the list, we have a well-warranted series repeat entry, which is yet another reason why I'm excited to make this an ongoing series. But as it stands, Super Ghouls and Ghosts is not only one of the very hardest freaking games that I've ever completed, it's also somehow become one of my favorite games as well. The presentation is beautiful and it really does give you a lot to look at and appreciate with strong incentive to keep playing just to see what could be next. The game still has this notorious control with stiff momentum needing to be a constantly considered aspect of how to navigate through its levels. It's been called a puzzle platformer for good reason, because if you approach this like any other game, you will get obliterated and never stand a chance. No matter how many power-ups you get, you still only need 2 hits to die. The levels are longer, the bosses are harder, the amount of time you can spend on this game without clearing a single level is astonishing, with minutes of difficult gameplay separating checkpoints, and of course, dying on a boss means going back to the mid-level checkpoint, which is not only heartless, but absolutely crazy. This is another one of those games that has been unfairly speculated on, when some claim the original is harder, but the fact is, it's not. Many people just don't know what the hell they're talking about because they use a bunch of opinions aside from playing the games themselves to decide. The game is so damn hard, super rare to meet people that have ever gotten through the first round. But the second round of Super Ghouls and Ghosts is another league, dude. But most importantly of all, beating the last level with the damn goddess bracelet. Man, the amount of factors here are just all against you. It's a straight line weapon that has range determined by the armor you are wearing, as in if you're not wearing any, it barely goes anywhere. The game simply wears you down into nothing. Like you'll go crazy and want to just stand in a corner for eternity. The fact is, there is of course no password feature or saving, and getting through an entire first round, then making it all the way here just to face an 11 out of 10 grind is simply not for the faint of heart. Every single attempt on this level starts with a tedious and time-consuming climb, which then puts you against a red devil, who you know is one of the most annoying and unpredictable enemies in existence, and then you're in between 2 heads shooting multiple orbs, where every one of your moves has to be perfect, and then a room where simply stopping for a second can result in you being gangbanged by a dozen ghosts at once. If you get hurt during any of this, your chance at victory is so far up your ass you'll never be able to pull it out. You need a perfect run in order to have a weapon with enough range and power to take this boss out. In round 1, using the bow is the safest and easiest thing you could possibly do, but now you have no choice to be in this guy's face, and the only way you can even reach to hit him is with the double jump, and what do you know about those? That nothing could possibly make you more of a sitting duck, vulnerable, and helpless. Again, you cannot get hit anywhere through this entire bitch of a stage, otherwise you can barely do anything with your weapon. There are no checkpoints here, so any death or hit, it's basically back to the bottom of the tower. So you see what I'm saying? The consideration of your inputs just have to be so freaking careful, but also somehow aggressive all at once, otherwise you will run out of time as well. The whole game is hard as balls, but this, it's a wrecking ball to your face. Considering the rest of the game and the absolute hell that is the learning curve, then finishing off what is most likely well over an hour, probably 2, and that's if you're playing well, just to reach one of the most brutal spikes in difficult gaming history, even with virtually unlimited continues. And I say virtually because you do have to actually accumulate some points for lives. It does give you a ton of tries though, even to last for hours, and it's still one of the very hardest games to finish out there. Alright, here we are at number 1. Some of you probably see it coming, so go ahead and say it with me. Number 1, Battletoads. Of course, as if that doesn't make any sense. How many lists out there have this thing as number 1 anyway? It's not being uncreative. It's about speaking facts based on experience, gameplay, and with my information provided. Battletoads is actually a fairly long NES game too, with 12 levels, 10 of them being completely full of knee-buckling, teeth-gnashing, controller-smashing, wall-punching, TV-throwing bullshit moments that will eat through your lives like a Toad lawnmower. And unlike our last entry, you will absolutely run out of continues sooner rather than later, bringing you back to the start screen. I mean, when a game's third level is Turbo Tunnel, you know it's not messing around. This served as a brick wall for millions of kids. You heard me, millions never saw past level 3. But only a fool would assume that's as hard as it gets. If that was the hardest part of the game, it would be towards the bottom of the list. However, with its seemingly millions of ways to die, including one-hit deaths, brutal enemies, and level cutoffs across its Icy Cave, Surf City, Snake Pit, Volkmeyer's Inferno, Intruder Excluder, Terratubes, Rat Race, Clinger Winger, and the final climb up the Deadly Tower, this game is just not at all an easy one to learn, nor is it easy to finish. One thing that messes with you a lot in this game are its decisions on how it handles your death. While there are several sections that allow you to continue from where you die as you blink back onto the screen, there are tons of areas where a death means you're going back to the last checkpoint. While level 1 and 2 let you continue your next life right where you are sent backward during the entire vehicle sections of Turbo Tunnel, Surf City, Volkmeyer's Inferno, and Clinger Winger, and then also during some of the most brutal platforming levels around with Ice Cave, Snake Pit, Intruder Excluder, Terratubes, and Deadly Tower. It's a game that punches you in the face when you're not looking, and it won't hesitate to kick the shit out of you while you're down. As with all of these games, practice makes perfect. Nothing is impossible. I've had a lot of practice with Battletoads over the years. It's a game that I'm confident in finishing when somebody just gives me around 40 minutes, but it's only because of the insane amount of consistent practice and patience on my end, coming back to the game for a couple attempts every other day for around a month or so. I still make mistakes and die or get caught, but that's just because the game gives little to no room for error, so it's bound to happen. The way I'm trying to scope this whole list in its order is this. If I were to hand these 10 games to somebody and said, you have a year to make it through these games or else, I strongly believe that the absolute least likely games that they would come back would be Super Ghouls and Ghosts and Battletoads. But hey, that's just my opinion based on the games I've beaten. What did you think of the list? As you can hopefully see, I'm really excited for this new series and to expand on these hardest games list, while being totally open and inviting to new suggestions, and the only way to truly discuss and debate about difficulty is to play through the games yourself. But with that in mind, I do look forward to seeing your comments and seeing what you might want to see me play in the future. I also think a top hardest sections or levels would also be a great series to start soon as well. So I'm dying to know, what are your hardest games that you've ever beaten? If you had to choose 3 games for me to try next, what would they be? I can't wait to see what you guys have to say, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.